Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in the heart of Carneros at none other than Domaine Carneros, that beautiful French-inspired chateau that sits up on a hill and welcomes everyone into wine country, famous for sparkling wines. But I am with TJ Evans, the winemaker here, who is actually specializing in the Pinot Noir still wines. TJ, welcome. Tell us about Domaine Carneros and what you do here.
Well, Allison, it's great to be here with you. Thank you so much. I like to think of Domaine Carneros as kind of like the unofficial welcome, as we're situated on the road between the town of Sonoma and the Napa Valley. So you're going to pass by us sooner or later.
I can't miss you.
That's right. So we were founded in 1987. It's a partnership between two families, the Taittingers from Champagne, from France, and the Kopp family from New York. And we've been making wine for 35 years with the bubbly. And as you mentioned, we're kind of the best kept secret in terms of Pinot Noir because we have been making Pinot Noir since 1992. Wow. So we're starting to get the hang of it.
I think so. So do you own estates? And if so, how many acres? Or are you purchasing fruit or a combination?
We are close to 100% estate. We have 6 different ranches, non-contiguous, all in Carneros, and we have 3 on the Sonoma side and 3 on the Napa side. So we're farming 400 acres. Wow. We have 250 acres of Pinot, 150 acres of Chardonnay, and we have 5 acres of Pinot Gris.
And what percentage goes into still wine?
About 20% of the grapes go into the still wine program. So in a good year, I'll be making around 12,000 cases, about 8 different Pinot Noirs, along with a little Merlot and a couple Chardonnays.
Ah. And what are your markets? Like, where are your wines available? Are they... you're a big winery, so I know you're in distribution, but what markets are you in? I know people can buy it here, but where else?
One of the interesting things about Domaine Carneros is, as you mentioned, Allison, we are in, nationwide distribution. We're in all 50 states, and we really focus on the Vintage Brut, the Brut Rosé, and the Estate Pinot. But that's just 3 wines. Here at the Chateau, we make 25 different wines. So, and that's really gives a lot of diversity, a lot of special wines that we work on for. We have quite a big wine club, and we sell the wines, obviously cellar door and to the wine club.
And so for all the Pinots you make, only one of them is really in distribution. Everything else, you got to come here to taste your wines.
That's correct. But you can get them in the wine club as well.
So you grew up on the East Coast in Massachusetts, right?
Sort of. I grew up in the East Bay, but I
Bay.
was born in Massachusetts, and I went to college in Massachusetts, but I'm from the East Bay.
Okay. So I'm curious, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Growing up, we always had wine on the table. That was a big part of our family. And we all have these moments. We have these wines that we remember, and I remember in the early 80s tasting a Gewürztraminer from Joseph Phelps. And I just couldn't believe that all these flavors and aromas could come out of the glass. And so that's one of my first wine memories.
Ah. And in all the years since, is there another, I'd say your aha moment wine or an aha moment wine that really either opened your eyes to a grape, a region, to wine in general, or maybe it was some other life-changing experience? What was that wine that comes to mind?
That's a tougher one. I think for me, it's the story of my career working in Pinot Noir for, I'm in my 3rd decade of working with Pinot Noir. I think it's a love affair. It's a journey. It's an exploration. My career, starting at La Crema in the 90s, I've really watched the explosion and the evolution of Pinot Noir on the West Coast. And for me, it's ongoing. I think every year There's a new challenge, which is the growing season and the vintage, the harvest, and vinifying the wines. And of course, Pinot Noir is so global. There's always new regions to explore. But at my house, we drink a lot of Pinot Noir, and it never gets old.
You're just jumping right through all my questions there.
Well, your list is pretty long.
I love how you avoided giving me one specific memorable wine.
Sorry about that.
Well, so before I ask you what you're drinking at home, although you just gave that answer, I'm curious, you work with Pinot Noir and you work a lot with it. Do you think it's a perfect variety, or do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
It really depends on your taste, right? We're sitting in Napa right now, and there are people who love Cabernet Sauvignon, and tastes differ. Mm-hmm. So for me, for my palate, I love Pinot Noir. I think it has, maybe you can correct me if you think this is an erroneous perception, but people on the production side, they think Pinot Noir is challenging to grow. Mm-hmm. And I think that the fickle grape, and I don't know, I work with it so much, I don't look at it as that heartbreaking or that frustrating. I think it's challenging and it's fun, but I think the rewards are immeasurable, and I think my goal is always just to keep improving and develop a finer touch, and just to make the wines a little bit better every year. And that's a challenge that I enjoy.
So you said you drink a lot of Pinot Noir. So if we were to come to your home, is that all we would find, or do you have anything else? And of those Pinots, is it mostly domestic? Is it mostly local to this region? Or what would we find in your cellars?
Yeah, I mean, Burgundy obviously is a frame of reference. We make Pinot Noir because we're inspired by Burgundy. We live in the shadow of Burgundy. I often wonder if history was different, if Pinot Noir developed in California, if they would be growing Pinot Noir in Burgundy, right? Because they would have the burden of, comparing it to us.
Right.
And so it's, obviously there's a parallel universe somewhere where that's happening. But no, so I always use Burgundy as a benchmark. I love Chambertin. I love Volnay.
And you have a lot of that at home?
No, not a lot. We drink a lot of domestic stuff. We drink a lot of coastal stuff. I really respect the wines from Ross Cobb. I know he's been doing it out on the coast for a few decades. I like Ted Lemon's wines at Literai. I like the Mondavi guys working on the Rain project.
Oh, Ross Cobb, his Pinot will leave you with longing and regret,
Says who?
He didn't see the movie The Menu?
Oh, I did.
It's nicely quoted in there.
I did. I was jealous of that. That was a great product placement. Yeah, I didn't get the quote though. Yeah.
And do you have any white wines at home, or any other red grapes you drink, or you're pretty Pinot centric?
No, it's. I am not ashamed to say that I love Chardonnay, and
Good.
Chardonnay is so amazing. There's such an ocean of Chardonnay out there, but when it's really grown well, I think I'm excited about the whole trend in both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I think there's a really focused pursuit of balance and elegance. For example, Allison, I remember this. I will tell you a joke, which is true, which describes sort of like the evolution in Pinot Noir. Back in the 90s, like if you were a winemaker and I'd say, "Hey, Allison," it's during harvest. I'd say, "Hey, Allison, have you picked your Pinot yet?" And you'd be like, "Oh man, I haven't even sampled it yet," right? Because we were going for high bricks, we were going for voluptuous, high gravity, big alcohol wines. And now, 25 years later, if I said during harvest, I said, "Hey, Allison, have you picked your Pinot yet?" You'd be like, "Oh, I picked it 3 weeks ago," right? Yeah. And that's kind of. But I think there is a pursuit to that real elegance and balance, and you see that in Pinot Noir, and you see it in Chardonnay. So I think I just love Chardonnay. I think a well-made Chardonnay is with really bright acidity, with nice, interesting, layered, complex flavors. If you modulate the oak, and the things we're doing now with concrete, fermenting in concrete, you get this flinty minerality. and you get the close lees contact without having to, bring in the oak. So I think there's just a lot of excitement going on.
So at your home, it's Chardonnay and Pinot.
That's correct.
Back to the basic. What do you drink at home?
There's a fair amount of bubbly. Okay. Not so much lately. I've kind of not been on a big bubbly kick lately, but I've been at Domaine Carneros for 15 years, and I think when I first started here, that was part of our mission. Really, is we're always spreading the message, right? Bubbly is not just for your birthday, your anniversary, for New Year's Eve. It's a great way to start any meal, with the acid and stimulate your appetite. But
So if all things were equal, you as a drinker, this is a quick one: red, white, or rosé?
Oh, it's going to be red. It's going to be Pinot. Yeah.
Still or sparkling?
It's going to be still. Yeah.
So is there a particular wine that you've opened up in the last week or so that drank really well? Something from your home collection that we're not quite sure what else is there other than Pinot and Chard?
That's a tough one. That's a really tough question. Something that really jumps out. I have to say, about 3 weeks ago, I was really fortunate to go to a wine tasting at a friend's house, and there were about 20 people. Scott Rich was there from Talisman and some local Sonoma people, and of all things, it was a Bordeaux tasting. And we were drinking Mouton, Lafite, and wines from the 80s. But the wine that stole the night for me was an 86 Lynch Bage that Scott had brought.
Wow.
And he had saved that for a long time, and it was a special bottle, and he opened it with friends. And when you taste wines like that, it's what, almost 40 years old, that are so long lived and still so beautiful. And for me, honestly, Allison, when I drink an old wine, I don't care if it's good or bad. It's nice when it's a stellar wine, but I feel like it's almost like you have to honor that wine, right? When it's so old and that bottle had to whatever journey it took to make it to your table. I think there's just something really. I have a lot of reverence when I open old wines.
It's a story in a glass.
Yeah, for sure.
So, because wine is a story in a glass, especially when it's older, but even when it's younger, there's a story. Does that get lost when we talk about scores? And I'm curious your opinion on wine critics and scores. Wasn't that a nice segue?
Yeah, that was clever. Well, I mean, again, the whole industry has really evolved. I remember, back in the 90s, and when you had like Parker and Spectator had a tremendous amount of power, and that's fine. I honestly think the industry needed that at the time, and maybe perhaps still does. We need an arbiter. We need some authority who can. Placing value is problematic, but we need some sort of benchmark. And then, we all witnessed the shift to the sommeliers, and the sommeliers are really gatekeepers to the restaurants, and they kind of put their own personal stamp on. And I think all those things are good. I think when I think about wine scores, it's almost like I remember I used to read Pauline Kael in the New Yorker for the cinema reviews because she's such a great writer. But I think but my point is you find someone, is your taste like Dan Berger, then you're going to like wines that Dan Berger. So when you figure out a critic that aligns with your taste, I think you can have, that can be valuable to a consumer.
So going back to your love of drinking Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, you're talking about two exceptionally food-friendly wines that are pretty easygoing with a variety of dishes. Do you put a lot of thought into pairing food and wine? Are there rules you follow or suggestions that you would give someone? Or do you just say drink Pinot and you have no problem?
I don't get that specific, honestly. I do agree with you. I think the versatility of Pinot Noir is so amazing. I mean, you can have poultry, you can have fish, you can have grilled meat. It just. I do love to cook. I do really like to cook, and that's been something that I really enjoy cooking for friends and.
But I would assume that with making, even in your wines, making 8 different Pinot Noirs, you know, you would pick a different one for a different dish,
Sure.
depending. So are there any certain, you know, key points that you're looking for that would make you decide why you pick one wine over another to go with a dish?
Yeah, I think, you know, with Pinot Noir, you kind of have a spectrum in fruit profile where on the really, on the lighter side, you have maybe some sort of like cranberry and red raspberry sort of flavors, and that tends to go with lighter alcohol. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you get into bluer fruits, more volume, more body, and more richness. So I suppose based on, you know, whether it's lunch or dinner or how heavy the fare is, you can kind of fine-tune the wine selection that way.
So for someone who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines yet, and let's go specific to the Domaine Carneros Pinot Noir still wines, what do you think they're missing out on?
Well, you know, it's such a great time to be a Pinot Noir drinker. You know, when I started back in the 90s, there was still a lot of experimentation and there weren't a lot of choices. And I think now you've got choices from the Willamette Valley in Oregon down to Russian River, Carneros, of course, the Sonoma Coast, down to the Central Coast, and everywhere in between. So what I love about Carneros and what I think Carneros has to offer the consumer is you get this beautiful ripe fruit, of course, because it's sunny. You get this spicy character, which comes from the persistent breeze that we have here. And you get this savoriness. Carneros offers a savoriness, and for me, I'm not trying to make Kool-Aid. I don't want it to be fruity. Is simple and boring to me. When you have the nice ripe fruit complemented by some savoriness, some spice, some earthiness, I think that makes it a really complete tasting experience.
So if space aliens were to land here on the property right now, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with?
Well, I welcome many people who have not been to Carneros before, and they're like, if you ask me, hey, TJ, what does Carneros taste like? I would serve you the Famous Gate. Okay. So the Famous Gate encompasses all that flavor profile that we've been talking about. When you have a bottle of Famous Gate, that wine has the DNA that goes all the way back to 1992 to the germination of the Pinot Noir still wine program at Domaine Carneros.
The Famous Gate, and if you are driving up here, you see the Famous Gate, right?
That's the one. That's the one.
So you've been here a long time, and you've been in the valley for, you said now you're on your third decade of vintages. So we know that every vintage tells a different story, and you said earlier that you really love how Pinot, you're looking for that vintage. That's the difference every year from year to year, and you're working. So as you wander through the vineyards, assuming you wander through the vineyards, do you look for any kind of signs or predictors that are going to determine what a vintage is going to give you?
Yeah, of course. I think every season, and now with climate change, the seasons are becoming more dramatic. And the seasons are becoming different. We've battled a lot of things over the last few years, fires, drought, and this year...
Atmospheric rains.
Right, our 12th atmospheric river. It's really been amazing, and so I think from a winemaking standpoint, approaching the vintage, you're following the entire growing season, and we're trying to understand it. So it starts with things like, well, what's the accumulated rainfall this year? Around different parts in Sonoma, we're between 32 and 35 inches, which is remarkable. We normally get 20 to 22 inches, and now so what do we know going forward? We know we have a full saturation of the soil profile. We'll be looking for bud break, which has just started over the weekend, and then we'll be watching to see, how the ambient temperature affects the growth. We had some issues with leaf curl last year because we had a very cold snap right after bud break, so we had a situation where the foliage was behind the cluster development, but it grew out of that. So yeah, there's a lot of markers, and by looking at these different markers, we're really trying to develop a deeper understanding of the growing season and what opportunities are going to be presented, and that's going to inform the strategy of how we want to make the wines during harvest.
So in looking back over the last 3 decades, do you, and taking in consideration these extreme sort of weather things that have happened, do you see a lot of variation from vintage to vintage in the wine, or do you see more commonality?
Well, yes and no. I think when you look at a place like Domaine Carneros, which has estate vineyards, there's a built-in thread of commonality that links all those wines together, and that's going to be the vineyards and the blocks and the clones and the winemaking style. But when I look back at some of the vintages, they're just so starkly different. Like when I think about 2011, that was a historically cool vintage, and the dominant personality of those wines was a lower alcohol, even picking into October. And then you skip ahead a couple vintages to 2013. 2013 was an extremely peculiar vintage because all the water for that vintage accumulated in December of 2012.
Wow.
So in the entire calendar year of 13, we had no rainfall. And so what that meant is you have more firm tannins. I mean, it's a drought vintage, and the wines were bigger, and they're still drinking beautifully now. The 13s are amazing. They took a while to come around, but even the bubblies show that extract and that power. So, yeah, there is still tremendous variation, and I'm really excited about 23. I mean, just in 21, we had a drought in 21 that was pretty severe.
And so when you are walking through the vineyard, do you have a tendency to talk to your vines and encourage them or reprimand them, or do you do more of that kind of in the winery when they're in barrel? Well,
I think I'm talking inside my head, but a lot of people say that I talk to myself a lot. So I'm sure I'm probably talking or mumbling. But that's one of the biggest joys of being involved in grape growing and winemaking is being out in the vineyards. It really ties you to the season. It really draws you into the beauty and the power of nature, and it's one of my favorite parts of the job.
Are there any sort of rituals that you've established at the start of harvest? Either for yourself or for your team?
Well, I mean, me personally, I like to be well rested before harvest. So, for us, with the bubblies, we typically start the first week in August. So we'll pick bubbly for about 3 to 4 weeks, and we're usually done by the end of August. But we're usually into the Pinot Noirs, the early ripening Pinot Noirs by mid-August.
No savoring a bottle of bubbles over the first pick?
We do that. We do that. We bless the grapes, absolutely. Yeah, we've been doing that every year.
That's a ritual.
On the first load of grapes. Thank you.
So when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up? What did you think you would be, or what were you prior to being a winemaker, or was this something you knew from a young age?
Definitely not something I knew from a young age. I guess I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. That's the great thing about this industry, and I think you'd agree, Allison, is it has this sort of magnetic pull, and most of the people that I know in winemaking kind of like wandered into it from another career or stumbled across it and then just got captivated by it, I think.
So how did you stumble into it?
I mean, I just... I don't know. How did I stumble into it? I don't know. I had an interest in wine from an early age. In fact, as you mentioned, I did go to college in Massachusetts, and I eventually studied at UC Davis. But I was thinking about it back then. I was actually thinking of transferring to Davis while I was in college, but I was having so much fun in Massachusetts that I decided to stay there.
So when you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
So I live in the town of Sonoma, and I have a nice group of friends. We'd like to do a lot of bicycle riding. So we do a lot of road riding and a lot of gravel riding, and there's just so many beautiful places out here to ride, not only in the Sonoma Valley and over into the Napa Valley, but we do a lot of rides out on the coast, out in Marin and further north on the coast.
So you have to work off all the wine you drink.
You develop a big thirst when you're out on your bike for a few hours, for sure.
And if you were planning a romantic evening for you and your spouse, what sort of wines set for that romantic evening? Are we starting with bubbles? Are you going right to Pinot? Is it Domaine Carneros, or is it something else?
Oh, there would certainly be an appetizer course. I love bubbly. Bubbly's such a great way to start. Here at Domaine Carneros, we have such an array of bubblies. I encourage people to visit if you have the opportunity. One of my favorite classes of wines we do is the late disgorged wines. So if you look at a Domaine Carneros bubbly, and there'll be a banner in the left-hand corner, and when you see that little banner, it says late disgorged. So we do a late disgorged Brut. In fact, we just did the dosage trial this morning for the 17, and it has this beautiful toastiness, a little bit of integrated sulfide. This is the 17 vintage. So, we tirage that in 18. It's on the lees 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 5 years in the bottle.
So just a lot of mouthfeel and
beautiful
texture.
Creaminess and richness. That's a great. And we do that with our vintage Brut Rosé also. People don't think about aging rosé, but the rosé just becomes really ethereal. That rose petal becomes more potpourri, just becomes really fragile and delicate and beautiful. So
that's what you'd start out a romantic evening with.
Yeah. I've been drinking a fair amount of cider lately, too. I think there's a lot of people who are doing, I really like a nice pear cider. I just think the fruit is just so beautiful. But yeah, I think bubbly is a nice way to start for sure.
So when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Wow, that's a tough one. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that the industry has really changed and evolved, and I think I'm pleased about the fact that my winemaking has evolved. Just continuing it. You think it's like when you say, "Oh, TJ, you've been making wine for 3 decades." It sounds like a lot, but I've only done 30 harvests, right? Mm-hmm. And so you really have to capitalize on those moments, and it's been fun. I think I'm making the best wines of my career now. So,
and in 5 or 10 years, maybe you'll be saying, "Now I think I'm making the best wines of my career," right? It's just an evolution.
Yeah, I got a few vintages left in me, so that's the goal.
So when you look back at your, we all get advice throughout our lives, whether it's in our childhood from our parents or teachers or in our career. Is there a piece of advice someone gave you along the way that you've carried with you?
Yes, there's so many. I had so many great mentors. I remember very clearly when I was working at La Crema, Dan Goldfield told me, he said, "TJ, nobody remembers how much wine you made. They only remember how good it is." And that really stuck with me. My dad was such a great mentor to me. He didn't really give me a lot of advice, but sort of the example that he set. He was very precise, just in the way he did things, did jobs, like the way you prepare for a project and complete it, just the way he worked so hard, And so you internalize those things. I guess the short story, I got my work ethic from my father, and being really proud of working hard.
So when we think about all the advice and the people that have been special to us, so We're sitting at a table, and we've got a bottle of your wine that you made sitting on the table and an empty seat next to you. Who from any walk of life, living or deceased, would you love to share a bottle of Domaine Carneros Pinot Noir with?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Obviously, I've never thought about that. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question to ponder. I'm sure I'll come up with an answer tonight. But
should we just linger and wait?
But I mean, who would I really want to share a bottle of wine with? Wow. You know, my mom's mother passed away right when I started getting into wine, so she never really got a chance to taste any of my wine. So that would be one person for sure.
And I'm sure you'll think of others, but I think that's a good answer. So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
That's going to be a sad meal. So what we always say at my house is, like, when we're getting ready for dinner, it's, what are we going to open?
Right.
So
never have an empty table.
Right.
So, you know, you've talked a lot. We've had some extreme vintages, and you were talking about variation. You think that we're going to be making wine in 300 years? You still think we'll be making and drinking it? Not us, but, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's hard to sort of contemplate that far in the future, but I'm sure we will be.
So, if unfortunately we were not, and you were sent off to a deserted island, which 3 wines would you want to take with you?
Wow, where are you coming up with these questions? You should
have told you I have some tricky, thought-provoking ones.
Only 3 wines, right? Because, you know, that's especially challenging, because as wine drinkers we love to explore, right? We're not. That's the funny thing when you think about, you know, beer drinkers and spirits drinkers, right? They're loyal. What do you drink? Oh, I drink Johnny Black or whatever. But for us, we always want something new. So I get 3 wines, not just one.
3.
Okay.
See, I'm letting you explore a little.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's easy for me. I mean, I would take a bubbly, probably something on the leaner, fresher side. I would take a Chardonnay, probably something on the leaner, fresher side.
Very vague on where it might come from or who made it.
And then there would obviously be a Pinot Noir. But, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to say which ones, but I think I could do okay with 3 wines. I mean, if you made it 1 wine, that would be really hard.
Pinot Noir.
Probably.
Well, we have come to the very end where we play our last game, which is pairing wine with music. You know, because it's called Wine Soundtrack. So This is the soundtrack of your wine life.
Okay.
Wine conjures up emotions in us when we drink it, and so does music. So looking at some of your wines, I want you to tell me what genre or artist or specific song it represents to you. So let's start with the Famous Gate Pinot Noir.
Okay, so the Famous Gate. I have to pair the Famous Gate with music. Well, that's tough. I have to say, I have been listening to a lot of Ray LaMontagne lately, and I would probably put the Famous Gate with Ray LaMontagne. You know, his music is kind of folksy. It's a little bit rustic, but it's not overly produced, right? Because he has this haunting voice, which is like the ethereal fruit, and then he has this beautiful guitar work, which is slightly rustic, and I think that might be the earthiness of the Pinot Noir, but I think that might be a good start.
And then you were talking about your late disgorgement. I know you don't make this wine, but late disgorgement Brut.
Okay. That's a classic. I might be going with something like maybe some Etta James, or maybe some Ella Fitzgerald, maybe a little Sarah Vaughan, something like that.
Now I'm going to pick a wine I'm a fan of, which we're sipping right now, which is the Pinot Clair. And you know I'm a huge fan because this is a white Pinot Noir. So Pinot Noir that you have taken off the skins, and it looks like a white wine.
Yeah, we started making this in 2008, and it's been a really, really fun journey. We've made this wine out of, we grow 20 different types of Pinot Noir here at Domaine Carneros, and I always use as a foundation, I use some Pommard, but we've made this with Martini, with Vodensville, we've made it with Swan, and it's such an interesting wine. It's fun to blind people on it because your expectations are that it's going to have a profile like a Chardonnay. But the entrance is just so juicy and so oily. And then the finish, there's so much, the acidity is so firm that it finishes really, it really invites you to take another sip because of that freshness. So I think I'm surprised there aren't more white Pinots out there.
I agree.
So I'm glad you're a fan. Oh, I have to do the song thing again? That's a tough one. I don't know about that. I really don't know. That's a tough one. What about you? Do you have any ideas?
I don't know. Well, as I'm sipping it, I mean, there is faint classical music playing in the background, but I have to say I don't think it fits the wine because this wine has a little more texture to it and it has a little more intensity to it while still being, fresh acidity and bright. So,
I don't know, maybe a little Amy Winehouse, maybe?
Ooh,
It's got that sexy soulfulness to it.
I like that. I mean, you have other Pinot Noirs we can go to, but I think we're going to leave it on that. A little Amy Winehouse and white Pinot Noir. It's a rare thing, not something most people would think of. Well, TJ, you've done it. You've made it to the end of Wine Soundtrack. I have one final question for you, and it's a two-parter.
Oh, no.
The first part is, where in the world is at the top of your bucket list to go explore? What wine area, wine region, wine country?
My wife's never been to Italy, so we really want to go to Italy, specifically Sicily. I'm really intrigued by those wines. Also want to get to Portugal, especially, and to northern Spain, to Galicia.
So 3 spots on your list.
Yeah.
And I'm sure more. So the second part of that is for somebody who wants to come visit you, is coming up to the Sonoma, Napa area, and they come to Carneros. How can they visit you? What can they experience?
Well, Domaine Carneros is open 7 days a week. We strongly encourage reservations. And also, we get pretty busy in the summer on the weekends. So if you can come on a Monday or a Tuesday, you can have a really nice, peaceful tasting experience. You can sit out on one of our patios, enjoy the sunset. But I invite everyone to come and visit us. I think we offer something really special, a real special taste of Carneros. And
you do tastings, but also pairings and tours and other things?
Yep, we have a tour. We have some special bites available. We have charcuterie selections. We have cheese plates. We have a caviar tasting, which is really special. And we have a bubbles and bites. So it's light fare. Sort of like, it's not like a big meal, but it's a very special. You can taste 4 bubblies paired with, and we change it. The cuisine changes quarterly. So we've done Moroccan, we've done Asian, and so it's a fun, especially because the bubbles are so great with food. So it's a really fun opportunity.
Right. But you can also come here and just do a Pinot Noir tasting.
You can do that.
Well, TJ, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack. I hope you had fun.
I had a great time. Those were some challenging questions.
You did well. So, cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, Allison.
You're going to have to fill your glass.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.